I was very young when I learned that my voice did not sound like I thought it sounded. I think at 4, 5, 6, my dad took my brother and I to go see Walt Disney's The Jungle Book. And when I got home, he recorded me singing The Bare Necessities. And for the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities, forget about your worries and your strife. Well, when my dad played that back to me, and I heard how my voice actually sounded, I began to sing with a little less volume, especially in church, where we typically sing. And as I got older, I began to sing even more quietly and self-consciously, unless I was by myself and I was sure no one would be harmed. I'm still self-conscious when I sing. Some of that owes to the fact that my father was an accomplished musician. He played in the Chicago Symphony, was a master's level student at Northwestern University. But because I believe, as my father also taught me, that God delights in the heartfelt praise of even those who sing poorly, I give it my best on Sunday mornings. And the medal of valor may be appropriate for those who have to sit next to me on Sunday morning, or more likely a Purple Heart. So there I was several years ago at Princeton Seminary. The Princeton Forums on Youth Theology and Culture. And early in the week, during one of the twice daily chapel services, something unexpected happened. I was suddenly aware, I knew it, I just knew it, that I was singing the hymn exactly as it was meant to be sung. I was hitting each and every note. And my heart swelled because just for a moment, I felt like God was hearing me express my heartfelt praise as beautifully as those who sing in our choir. And yet, even as I began to sing more boldly, there entered my mind a sense of uncertainty, a niggling demonic whisper that said, "You're fooling yourself." Like that time your dad recorded you singing, you don't sound like you think. And so as we began to sing the third verse, I prayed that somehow God would give me some confirmation that and confirmed what I felt to be true, that I was singing beautifully. And so as the hymn ended and we began to sit down, the woman who was seated in front of me turned and said to me, "I hope I get to sit next to you in other worship services, because your voice was wonderful." And the two women next to her nodded in agreement. I don't think anyone can imagine quite how I felt in that moment. What a gift it was. What sheer joy I felt. And to be clear, if it's not clear already, it had nothing to do with pride or arrogance. My elation was due to a sense of intense wonderment that I had been given a chance just that once to offer a pleasing and unrestrained gift of praise to the God who created me. And then in answer to prayer, what goodness to have others turn and confirm that my voice, my singing had also elevated their. The desire to offer heartfelt praise is the overarching theme of our reading this morning from Psalm 8. And as we consider the power of words on this fourth week in our series, a psalm like this one helps us to understand the importance of deepening our vocabulary of praise, of widening our vocabulary of praise. Now, Psalm 8 is unique among the writings of the First Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, in that it is the only hymn in all of the Hebrew Scriptures that is composed entirely as an address to God. From the very first note, the psalmist pours out his unrestrained praise. O Yahweh, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Now, because God's name, God's personal name, Yahweh, is to be revered above all else and is too hallowed to be spoken by a mere creature, the English translation of this psalm in our Bibles follows the Jewish custom and substitutes a word that we translate as Lord in all capital letters. And so whenever we see that in the Bible, the word Lord in all capital letters, it's not a title like it sometimes is. It indicates that originally God's personal name was there, Yahweh. And so, before we look to anything else, it is important for us to take note of the fact that the psalm ends with a reprise of the first verse. O Yahweh, our sovereign, how majestic is your name in all the earth. Thus, Psalm 8 begins and ends with direct and uninhibited praise to God. The psalmist has shaped this hymn to remind us that from first to last, from beginning to end, that our whole lives should be framed in praise to God. Indeed, every verse of the psalm, except one, is addressed directly to God. You have set, you have made, you have given. But then we notice, and it's in the middle of the hymn, it doesn't look like that in our English translations, but in the Hebrew it's much more obvious that the psalmist refers to himself just once, and it's right in the middle, when I look at your heavens. And if we locate ourselves there, right in the middle, we then realize that we are both centered and surrounded, as it were, by God's glory and grace. And if we do that, then we might just get a little sense of the emotion that the psalmist was feeling as they composed this hymn. And we might join together in praising God, who not only arranged the moon and the stars, but who is also mindful of us. I think we might think of it as preoccupied with us. Why does God care that much? Now, anyone who's gazed at the starlit sky, or who's watched the sun go to sleep behind the ocean's far horizon, or who's watched a newborn sleeping, or even has overheard the uninhibited singing of a young child, I think can relate to the praise that's displayed in this psalm. G.K. Chesterton once wrote that the worst moment for an atheist is when they're feeling gratitude and they have no one to thank. You know, I don't want to get down on atheists. I think there's good reasons to be disappointed in us religious folk. But I love another quote by Meister Eckhart. He was a medieval German priest, and he once told his congregation, if the only prayer you say in your whole life is thank you, it would suffice. Now, I don't know about you, but I have not been overwhelmed of late by a sense of gratitude. To the contrary, I felt beleaguered. I feel both scared, scarred by the incivility that is seeping into all areas of our societal discourse. On TV, radio, and the newspaper, and podcasts, social media, there's this relentless barrage of raging antagonism that aims to tear down and abuse them or the other, whoever they may be. And that, in turn, fuels a persistent anxiety that we feel that the world is coming apart and that there's not really anything we can do about it except maybe go out and buy a gun to protect ourselves from them when the apocalypse occurs. And friends, I'm not saying that God-driven apocalypse. We human beings are going to do this to ourselves. I've heard this phrase, hurt people hurt people. And I think the reverse is probably also true. Praised people praise people. And so it seems to me that one of the crucial responses a church can offer in such a culture is to be a place where people can experience a community that is dedicated to and steeped in a language of praise and gratitude. And that's the language that runs throughout Psalm 8. The tremendous power of praise is noted in the second verse, where even the babbling sounds of a newborn or infant can silence the enemy or the avenger. You see that? Even the forces that oppose God fall silent at the unformed praise of a newborn's gibberish. Praise is that powerful. And so using a grammar of glory, a vocabulary of praise, reorients us to our better selves. It locates us into our better natures. I'm wondering if I am silly to believe that a church that is on a mission to show people how to speak words of gratitude and praise to God and to each other might become a church that's filled to the gills. Is that too ridiculous to hope? And is it not tragic that such a church would both radically countercultural and very different than many churches now are. I just pulled this morning. Reverend Benjamin Kremer, if you haven't heard of him, he's really good. He says, a Christianity that constantly talks about all the enemies it has that it need to be conquered rather than all the neighbors it has that deserve to be loved is a Christianity that is following fear rather than Jesus. I don't remember where Jesus said go and write down a list of all your enemies. Perhaps it's somewhere. The Gospel of Edward. I don't know. In Philippians 4:8, and this is an important verse for me, the Apostle Paul tells us the church needs to be just such a place where an attitude of praise counters the cultural forces that oppose our Christ-like God. Paul writes, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there's anything that is worthy of praise, think about these things. And so the reverse is also true. By implication, Paul is saying that we should not, as our raging politicians and pundits do, train our gaze upon those things that are impure or displeasing or deplorable or whatever is unworthy of praise. Paul is basically saying don't focus on those things. And that doesn't mean sticking our heads in the sand. But it does mean that we are called to consciously retrain our gaze when we find ourselves focusing, as we often do with a laser focus, on those things that are not worthy of our attention. In other letters, Paul explicitly tells his followers, the followers of Christ, they must put away gossip, they must put away grumbling, must put away destructive speech, because these styles of discourse, which only serve the purpose of dehumanizing others, that is not treating them as if God has crowned them with honor and glory. And so those behaviors have no place in a community of faith. Which is why our Ephesians 4:29, you knew I was going to get to this, didn't you? Our Ephesians 4:29 verse is such an important theme verse for our series. By the way, we also have some new cards. They don't have any name on them, but our church, they have our worship times, and you can get these in the back, and just leave them wherever you go, like confetti. But anyway, if you would join me, if you have your card, join me in Ephesians 4:29, or quickly flip to it in the Bible in the pew. But let's say this together. Let no evil come out of your mouths, but only what is useful for building up as there is need, so that your words may give grace to those who hear. A Swiss theologian, Hans Urs von Balthasar, says this: we need only know who and what we really are to break into spontaneous praise and thanksgiving. I pray that we would be a church that is always ready to help people to discover who they are, made in the image of a loving God and crowned with honor and glory. Amen.